One thing that I've been focusing a lot on, Garrick, and I think I will for the next 10 years, quite frankly, is the Inflation Reduction Act, which obviously is it's around for the next 10 years. Came out obviously towards the end of 2022. I think there's something like 70 plus credits, addressed in the IRA. Welcome to Buzz House, a Baker Tilly podcast where you can find all the buzz around multifamily housing. I'm Don Bernards, the partner in charge of Baker Tilly's multifamily housing practice.
And I'm Garrick Gibson, a partner at Baker Tilly, also specializing in consulting on multifamily housing transactions across the country.
Each week, we'll bring you a guest or a topic in the multifamily housing industry that will help you win now and anticipate tomorrow. Let's get started. As we move into 2023, Garrick and I want to have a discussion around a recap of some hot topics and themes we have discussed on the Buzz House this past year that affect your projects and the industry. We're going to kind of continue to track many of these, right? These are not just one and done kind of issues. They're industry topics. So we're going to bring them up. Probably many of them will come up here as we move into forward into 2023. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Garrick to get us started. Garrick?
Thanks, Don. Before I get started here, obviously, I just want to say 2022 was a very interesting year. There's a lot of things going on, and glad some things came out of it. And hopefully, 2023 is going to be even more interesting. So let's just dive in. So one of the things that I thought was interesting for this year, and we discussed it on numerous podcasts, just kind of as part of what was going on, were interest rates. And how these increases have literally wreaked havoc on transactions' ability to close. So here are some examples of where rates have actually moved since last year. So, typically, the debt products out there will have some interest spread, and it'll be added to some interest index. One of those being, the secured overnight financing rate. You see a lot of construction debt having this. The SOFR index is what we like to call it. This has moved from sub 1% early 2022 to over 4% at the end of 2022. And in addition, another index we like to track, you see it a lot on permanent financing, is the 10-year Treasury. It climbed from roughly about 1.6% to over 4% in some of the months in 2022 and ended, just shy of 4%. It's also easy to forget that the Fed was actually holding the federal funds rate at around zero as recently as the first quarter of 2022. And by year end 2022, the federal funds rate was 4.5%. And these came in various rate increases throughout the year. And I just remember, every time we were sitting there looking to close a transaction, there was a looming interest rate hike that was coming, and it kind of pushed a lot of projects back, right? So these interest rate increases are to me are pretty dramatic within a 12-month time frame. And this has prompted some states, however, to allow projects to apply for additional credits. I know we saw some additional funding that was available to be applied for, if they had any funds available, and giving precedent to some of these transactions that had allocations that, that were running into this trouble. But even with all those additional measures, some of these projects were actually already tight, at the lower interest rates that they were underwriting at, could not get enough additional proceeds to combat this rate increase. So I'm pretty, just curious, over the next several quarters of where we're going to go with these interest rates.
Yeah, no, exactly, Garrick. I know. Hopefully we see. I hear different people. Hopefully, end of summer they're coming down, but I guess we'll see. We don't have the crystal ball. One thing that I've been focusing a lot on, Garrick, and I think I will for the next 10 years, quite frankly, is the Inflation Reduction Act, which obviously is it's around for the next 10 years. Came out obviously towards the end of 2022. I think there's something like 70 plus credits, addressed in the IRA, but specifically, obviously, we're focusing on multifamily housing. And we've talked about it here, and actually we're going to have a webinar probably in about a month or so stay tuned to that around the IRA and multifamily housing. But with solar specifically, we expect for affordable housing properties, a typical solar federal tax credit will be 40 to 50% of the cost of solar equipment for your project. Again, if you're taking this into account with low-income housing tax credits, the total amount of federal tax credits earned may be around 100% or more of the actual project cost, solar project costs. If you're 9%, it's probably more. It could be 120% of cost, right? So all of a sudden we have the equipment paid for with the federal credits that you'll be able to syndicate. I think what's equally as important to think about, or even perhaps even more important than if I'm getting this paid for almost 100%, is what is the benefit of the utility savings, and can we split that benefit between both the resident and the project? And if I was looking at formerly tenant paid utilities, do I want to look at project paid utilities? So a lot of really interesting considerations and how that then affects both cash flow and obviously your debt sizing going forward. In addition to solar, which I think is going to be very important, many of you may have utilized or known about the 45L energy efficiency credit, which again are for multifamily buildings 3 stories or less. So maybe not applicable to all of your projects you're working on. But if you remember, again, formerly it was up to a maximum of $2,000 per qualifying unit, now up to a maximum of $5,000 per qualifying unit. But the project must use prevailing wages and a number of other criteria. So stay tuned again to the webinar we'll be having out in maybe a month or so on that. Again, electric vehicle charging stations, also something more and more multifamily deals are putting in a credit for that.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that. It seems the solar on the affordable housing, it seems like a no-brainer, and I can't wait for that webinar to come out.
And Garrick, one other thing, and I know we talked about this probably ad nauseum a year ago or so, is the average income rules, final rules, finally came out from the IRS here in October of 2022. And really, they did address most of the concerns, if not all the concerns, the industries had. One big concern was, when is a project out of compliance? The original proposed language had, if I had one unit out of compliance, that could put me over 60%, right? Maybe I was right at 60%, I had one unit, took me out of compliance, or that one unit was 60, took me to 60.2% for the whole project, that the whole project would be out of compliance. And that was obviously a huge risk to investors. And that's why many deals were at 55%, 56%. The final regulations said, you know what, no, one unit's out of compliance is one unit out of compliance, as opposed to the whole. So that took this whole cliff test, off the table, which is very important. One other significant item was unit designation. Again, the previous draft legislation regulation said, hey, at place in service, I need to designate, this is a 30, this is an 80, it's that unit for the rest of my compliance period. Well, that did not give you as the owner, property manager, flexibility, right? If a 30 moves out, an 80 moves out, could I go to a 40s, a 70? I mean, just really that flexibility of kind of leasing the units back up. This final regulations did indeed allow the flexibility to change AMI designations over time. That being said, many state housing finance agencies, Garrick and I are talking to, many investors are still trying to figure out, what do the compliance systems look like? How do we measure the AMI is changing around and so forth. So although the language was very favorable, we haven't necessarily seen the impact of saying, hey, I can just do an average income deal at 60%, average income. So I think Garrick will probably see that kind of slowly evolve as we move into 2023, how we're going to track it, what investors and HFAs will allow.
Yeah, I mean, when it came out, I was expecting for us to, or at least there to be some relief in that area, because there were still projects obviously being done under income averaging, but there was a cushion being built in, sometimes down to like 54%. And I thought when this came out that some of that would have just kind of sort of evaporated, and there'd be a lot more investors that were coming in there that weren't necessarily pushing back on certain things. But obviously we haven't necessarily seen that happen as efficiently as I thought. So it's interesting. We'll see how that plays out over 2023. Don, one of the things I wanted to talk about is obviously, just in reflecting back in the year, it's just some of the guests that we had and some of the topics. And one of the things I thought was interesting that we had was one of our more recent podcasts, where we had various guests speaking on healthcare institutions and how they're teaming up with, state housing finance agencies and developing strategic partnerships to help finance affordable housing. I recall in one of the podcasts where we had various guests on, there was an example where the New Jersey Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency we're actually matching funding contributions from some participating hospitals. So this is something that I have not seen a lot in the past, and I mean, I would hope to see more of these types of programs moving forward, because it's not only to provide just the additional needed capital to fund the project, because obviously we know we have a massive shortfall in affordable housing, but really to have more participation from the healthcare community, given we work on CMF here, right? I mean, we read all of those gap reports and understand that there's documented correlation between housing and the impact it has on the positive health outcomes of the individuals and the communities, within those housing developments. So it's interesting, and I hope to see more of this come through, and maybe we can have maybe a follow-up podcast later on in 2023 to see how it's progressed.
Garrick, I agree, and I'm excited to follow that too, right? And that whole discussion, the podcast actually just came out, was around NCSHA and working with, I think, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Robert Wood Johnson, giving out 6 grants. So, right, how's that going in those states, among other states and healthcare systems, as you mentioned? One other thing that I think has been a hot topic, I think will remain a hot topic in an area where we're seeing a lot of redevelopment, is with public housing authorities. We had Tom Davis from HUD join us earlier in 2022. He gave us an update on the Section 18 RAD blends, which are going very well. We're seeing many projects. These blends are allowing projects to get a percentage of units with higher rents at the FMR and the balance at RAD rents. And the ratio is kind of based on the level of construction. Obviously, the theory being if you have significant rehab or new construction, I might need higher rents, and the RAD Section 18 blends allow that for. And we're seeing rents at $50, $100, $150 higher with the FMRs compared to the RAD rents. Tom Davis also touched on Faircloth to RAD, which again is the ability to take the Faircloth units, off the shelf and back into production. So a lot of good things, and it's a neat thing with the RAD program. We're continuing to see legislative updates, which are just helping these projects move forward. And the industry is expecting a new HUD RAD notice sometime. We thought it might come out in the fall. We think it's going to come out sometime this winter. So as soon as that comes out, we'll kind of jump on top of that, keep you aware of what's going on, and perhaps even have a separate webinar on the updated RAD notice.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously, before we wrap up, I know we wanted to talk about some items that didn't pass, but maybe will be recirculated back through Congress. But before, we can't obviously end a year, a reflection on our year on this podcast without mentioning the fact that we recorded a live podcast at AHF Live conference. That was our first live video recording. I actually thought that podcast was great and is extremely relevant with the guest. It had a different feel since it was, recorded live, but the guests we had on were really passionate, and they had a great deal of content that sort of gave a glimpse into what the future of affordable housing might actually look like. So, what did you think about that format, Don?
Garrick, I absolutely loved it. You're right. It was the guests we had, like you said, kind of made it special. I like how you said the looking forward, because Alexis Sofianos with Isuzu, it's really, we're thinking now more about residents. How can we help residents, move forward on their goals and sustainable, kind of living for them. So that was great. Like you said, some policy with Matt Josephs from LISC, and then just some interesting kind of newer programs for emerging developers with Ben Gillespie of LISC and Dancy Stronghill with Senior. So yeah, just great guests. Great, right? A lot of them really talking about the future and kind of neat programs. As Garrick said, just kind of wrapping up here, it's interesting. We talked about a lot of things that are happening, and something we talked a lot about that didn't happen, of course, was new legislation around expanding the low-income housing tax credit. We've talked ad nauseum about the 50% test and getting that lowered to 25%. So many states, every state you're talking to is almost running out of bond cap. States that never formally ran out of bond cap, like Alabama, as an instance, is out of volume cap. So it's that is still out there. That is still a key piece of legislation. The affordable housing, industry. Again, keep talking with your legislators about how important this is. The other big thing, obviously, is bringing back that 12.5% of 9% credits that had been out there for a 4-year period, had sunset, and trying to get those 9% credits back on the table. Again, these two provisions would be projected to create over 1 million additional affordable units over the next 10 years. And just thinking about 2023, Garrick talked about it. I think we're going to see a lot about health and housing. So expect some podcasts around health and housing. I think creative financing, deals are tough. They only get tougher. I think I've been doing this 25 years, Garrick a long time as well. There's no such thing as a vanilla deal. So we're going to have some things around, 501c3 bonds, essential function bonds. That's going to be coming out. So just innovative financing. Again, listeners, if there's topics you would like Garrick and I to address, to bring listeners on, if you've got a topic, reach out to us. We'd love to have you on, have a talk about a topic, kind of meet your needs as well. So with that, thank you, listeners, for tuning in today.
Thank you for listening to Buzz House. To receive a notification when new episodes are available, please subscribe to Buzz House, a Baker Tilly podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. For additional resources around multifamily housing, check out bakertilly.com. And if you have a suggested topic, please send them to build@bakertilly.com. That's BUILD @bakertilly.com.